Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be talking about Supernova 2024, which was not only the first NA major of the ranking season, but it's also likely going to be the biggest major of the ranking season, with a ton of top talent coming in from all around the world. For your top 16 finishers, you got Ken, Zomba, Dabuz, and Mia in 13th, Tweak, Mars, Snow, and Onin in 9th. In 7th, you have a Kola and Yoshidora. 5th is Raro and Hurt. 4th is Osimo, 3rd is Shattuck, 2nd is Sonix, and taking the entire thing was Spargo. So first things first, we got to talk about our top 8 teams that did not get into that top 8, and all of them do manage to make it to day 3, but that doesn't mean they had an amazing run. Starting off with Shuton, he's going to end up getting 17th place, but the only notable win that he's able to pick up on is going to be on Wrath, and he ends up losing to both Reru and Mia, so neither of those are bad losses, and Wrath is a decent win to have under your belt, but this is definitely an inconsistency that Shuton did not want to start off his season. 17th place isn't the end of the world by any means, but considering that this is the most important event of the year, it definitely sucks to not go further in the tournament, and that especially is going to apply to Mia, who ends up getting 13th place. He ends up losing to Mars in the winner side. We'll talk about that when we talk about Mars. Does manage to get wins on Soar, Beast Mode Paul, and the aforementioned Shuton, but then has the misfortune of running into Sonic. So again, it's a situation with Mia where the losses aren't terrible by any means. I know Mars wasn't ranked super high last season, but if he actively competes this season, I do think that is likely going to change. And for Mia, the main thing that he was looking for this season was literally just not to get a placement like this. He starts off so strong with that first place at Coolon 12. The only thing that's been stopping him from being the best player in the world for honestly a couple seasons in a row at this point is going to be those inconsistencies, because he grinds so hard and he wins so many events, but unfortunately for him, at the biggest event of the year, he is going to take a hit on the chin there, but nothing that he can't bounce back from, considering that some of the other contenders for the best in the world also didn't do amazing. But our final top 8 team that did not get into that top 8 is going to be Tweak, just barely missing it with a 9th place, picking up wins on PK Chris and most notably Osimo before losing to Hurt and Sonix, and you're literally losing to two players who are both top 5 in the world. Yeah, it's definitely unfortunate. Tweak absolutely could have won those sets, but he just didn't this time around, so 9th place, not the end of the world. And there is a couple more inconsistencies that I do want to go over, starting off with Mudace, who's going to get 65th. He ends up losing to Isaiah really early on. Manages to get a couple of nice wins, but ultimately falls to Monty in Peach Game Watch, which is definitely a difficult matchup for Peach. And these things just kind of happen with Mudace. He's always been a player with some inconsistencies. When you're playing someone as high maintenance as Peach, if you're having an off day, it's going to be very evident in your gameplay. And Mudace just wasn't feeling himself at this event. These things happen. In 49th, you're going to have Riddles. He's going to end up losing to Chase in the winner side and Icy Mist in the loser side. And in that set versus Chase, he ends up going all Terry, does not elect to choose the Kazuya. And I don't think that's an incorrect choice by any means. I definitely think Terry is a better choice into Palutena than Kazuya is. And in the loser side of the bracket, he doesn't really have a correct option there with both the Terry and the Kazuya losing. Icy Mist is just such a tough opponent because of how difficult Samus is to deal for those FGC characters. And this is like the first kind of bad placement that we've had from Riddles in 2024. He's had a couple missed top 8s, but the fact that he's been juggling Street Fighter and Smash Ultimate, and this is the first time that we've seen him have a major slip up, is honestly pretty impressive. And yeah, it's super unfortunate that that's at the most important event of the year and also the first one of the season, but I'm very confident Riddles is going to be able to make the bounce back there. And the final notable player that I want to talk about there under performance is going to be Tama P, who ends up getting 25th. He ends up losing to Crep Soleil in the winner side, and we'll talk about that when we talk about that. Doesn't manage to get a nice win on Tilde, but Peanut stops him from qualifying to that day 3. And it's not an amazing placement for Tama P by any means, but at least it is way better than that 129th he ends up getting at Coolon. I'm sure he was looking for a harder recovery at this event, but all things considered, it's not too bad. Really quickly, just to highlight some losers runs that didn't quite make it into that top 24, you have Lima and Huampy. Starting off with Huampy, he's going to end up losing to Gax fairly early on, but then he beats Luca, Justin JPEG, Vivid, Cody, and most importantly, the reason that I'm mentioning this run is he manages to beat Wrath in a Game 5 set with solo Banjo, which is obviously very, very impressive. Ends up losing to Kola for that top 24 qualifier, but giving Banjo some representation. This is the best win a Banjo player from NA has gotten in quite some time, so huge shout outs to Huampy for that one. And Lima also barely just not getting into that top 24, ends up getting upset fairly early on by PK Chris, but then has a super solid losers run, beating Chunky Kong, Luis, Sense, Modzai, and Chase before falling to Dabuz in a absolutely banger game 5 set. Reverse 3-0 into Buzz's favor. Definitely could have gone into Lima's favor, but just didn't end up doing so this time around. So solid runs for those players. Just really quickly wanted to mention the two of them. And I've actually got two more players that I don't really have a full segment for, but I kind of just want to mention them. And that is going to be Beast Mode Paul and Kola. Starting off with Beast Mode Paul, who had one of the best sets of the entire weekend with him versus Mia, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. He ends up losing to Ken in the winner's side, then beats Armadillo, TM7 Zap, and T before falling to Mia. 3-0's T, by the way, and I know T is at a pretty inherent disadvantage here because he isn't going to be in his native language with the menu. I don't know if he can read the menu at all, and especially as Pac-Man, a character that I do think already kind of struggles with Hero, definitely not a fun matchup. And then that Mia set was an absolute banger. Game 5 absolutely could have gone into Beast Mode Paul's favor, but Mia just barely closes it out, and a reverse 3-0 in his favor, by the way. So kind of heartbreaking for Paul to not get into that top 24, but just a really good showing of, hey, this guy is still one of the best players that we have to offer in America, and here is why. And Kola pulling out the Aegis at this event. We all known about the Aegis existence before, but I feel like this is the first time I've actually seen it at the super top level, and it doesn't end up winning him his set versus Raro. For context, he ends up going Roy in the first two games, loses those, goes Aegis in games 3 and 4, manages to win it, and then kind of gets bopped in that 5th game, unfortunately. But I was really happy to see the Kola Aegis coming out at this event. We also saw the Kola Cloud coming out versus Onin, and though it didn't have a ton of success, I like that Kola is experimenting with his characters. I mean, what's the point of playing like 3 super fast sword characters at the top level if you're not going to be alternating between them? Even though Roy is definitely Kola's best character, that doesn't mean it has to stay that way for certain matchups. I like that he's trying to use his other characters, and it gives me hope that the Snake can come back. I'm not going to lie. Moving on, I want to highlight some of our European players, starting off with a quick shout out to Tarek, who didn't do bad in the main event by any means, but the big attraction of the weekend for him was definitely taking that set over a Kola at one of the pre-invitationals, and even though it doesn't count for the rankings, you still beat a Kola. Like, that is obviously very impressive. But moving on to that main bracket, you're going to have Lugi finishing in 25th. He's going to end up losing to Ling fairly early on, but has a super nice losers run, beating Leviathan, Raven King, MVD, Mugen, and PK Chris before falling to MK Leo in a game 5 set that 1000% could have gone into his way. A reverse 3-0 from Leo there, but Lugi was very close to pulling that one off, and he's been struggling a lot more in 2024 than we saw him in 2023, so these performances from him are super promising. Massive props to him for that, and I'm sure the second half of the season could definitely be better than the first half was, because this is honestly an amazing start, and the highest placing European of the weekend is going to be Krepsele. He's going to pick up wins on Wild, and he's going to get that huge reverse 3-0 on Tama P with the Wario of all characters. He almost manages to beat Shattuck as well, taking him to game 5 with the Rob. That gets him into that top 24, where then he does end up losing to DeBuzz. I believe he played Rob in that set as well. So in the most important sets for Krepsele, Steve wasn't really the character that was showing up for him. It was the Wario, it was the Rob. The fact that he can play so many characters at the top level is really indicative of how talented this player is. I feel like a lot of people in NA maybe weren't aware of how good Krepsele is. You should now. This is someone that is in contention for best European in the world. I mean, he was ranked the highest European if we're only looking at within the region's results, and it's absolutely deserving that he gets that title because he has been killing it this year, and I think he's only gonna get, like, massively better. And the final player that I want to talk about before we move on to that top 12 is going to be Atata, actually. He ends up losing to Kola game 5, but then has a really nice losers run, beating Dominator, Apollo Kage, Gacked in the Nestido, most importantly, as well as Jazzo to get into that top 24. And once in the top 24, he does end up falling to Ken. But this is just like an amazing run from Atata. As I said, that win over Gacked is so important. Not only are you beating him in the Nestido, but Gacked is also someone that was borderline top 20 in the previous season. So this is an amazing start for Atata. I'm really curious to see if he's going to be able to keep it up. And there's two final things that I want to highlight before we get into that top 12. The first one is going to be that Giest is actually the highest placing Bayo at the event, getting 17th place over both Lima and Tama P, who end up getting 25th. So massive props to him for that one. That is such an achievement. And also that Light ends up getting double eliminated by Sonic at this event for 17th place, loses to Ken in a game 5 and just get it straight up 3-0'd by Sonix in the loser side of the bracket. So clearly that's going to be a matchup where you have like going back to the drawing board and seeing what he can figure out. I still do think that Fox does decent in that matchup. I definitely don't think it is a winning matchup by any means at this point. I feel like the Sonic players have been proving that the offstage gameplay is just too strong for the character in that matchup. But I'm curious to see what Light does as the former best player in the world versus Sonic going into his future encounters versus those players. And we are going to be moving on to that top 12 now, so if there's a player that are left out and you're curious about their run, just leave a comment down below, and I'll be sure to tell you how they did, and sub while you're down there. But our 9th place finishers are going to be Tweak, Mars, Onin, and Snow. We already talked about Tweak, we're not going to do it again, starting off with Onin. They pick up wins on both Mystery and T before falling to Mars in the winner side, where then they get wins on Kola and Ken before falling to Yoshidora, barely not getting into that top 8 this time around. And considering that Yoshidora beat a Kola at this event, you can't feel too bad about that loss. And that win on Ken is especially impressive. I do think that Sonic is Steve's worst matchup at this point, so for Honest to be able to overcome that is absolutely huge from them. And this is a pretty solid start to the season for Onin. Obviously, they would have liked a top 8, but as someone who was borderline top 20 last season because they really just didn't go to enough events, it's nice to have a solid placement under your belt to start off the season. It would have been super unfortunate for Onin to just bomb out right away, mess up that consistency they had prior, but that was not the case. Really good start for Onin. It could absolutely be top 20 coming into the second half of the year. Speaking of someone that I think could be top 20, you're going to have Mars, who had a pretty weak start to the year, just pop off insanely hard at this event, picking up wins on TM7 Zap, Siski, and most importantly, beating both Mia and Onin to get to that top 8 qualifier, where he does unfortunately lose out. Spargo in the winner's side and Akola in the loser side, though he does manage to take Akola to game 5. So you took the best player in the world to game 5 and you beat the second best player in the world 3-0. Even though I do think that Zero Suit Game Watch is a pretty good matchup for Zero Suit, that is still such impressive feat, even forcing Mia off of the game watch in that final game, putting him on the Steve. This is such a good start to the season for Mars, and it feels like it's showing a ton of promise of what we can expect to see from this guy. And that final 9th place finisher is going to be Snow, who picks up wins on Justice, Gact, and most importantly, Sonix. And not only does he beat Sonix, but he beats it by timing him out, using his own game plan against him. This is something that was very clearly crafted beforehand by Snow. He had a game plan going in, and he was able to execute on it. Massive props to him for getting that upset, and unfortunately isn't able to get into that top 8 as he's eliminated by 2 of his countrymen in Reru and Osimo. But Snow shows up at Supernova, beats the best player in NA, and leaves. Like, that's a pretty solid run. In 7th place, you're going to have Yoshidora and Akola, starting off with Yoshidora, who is going to pick up wins on Tilde, Giest, and Akola himself before falling to Shattuck for that top 8 qualifier. Still manages to get into that top 8 by beating On, where then they ultimately lose to Osimo in a game 5 set that absolutely could have gone into his favor. And aside from that 49th at Kage 12, the second half of the year has been so much better for Yoshidora. It feels like he's been picking it up a ton recently, and this is going to be one of his strongest performances of the year so far, most notably with those 2 wins over the best Steve players in the world. It's been such a long time since Yoshidora was able to actually get that dub over Akola. He used to be the player that had one of, if not the best record versus him in the entire world, so that has got to feel amazing to do, especially at the most important event of the year. But he ruined a lot of people's brackets by sending Akola down to the loser side. Let's look at that. He's going to end up getting wins on Beastly and Jackal before falling to Yoshidora, and once he does lose to Yoshidora, Akola then beats MKLeo, DeBuzz, and Mars to get into that top 8 through the loser side, and he goes game 5 versus every single one of these opponents. Every single one of them absolutely could have taken Akola out, but he manages to brave it all the way to that top 8. We saw Mask off Akola for the first time versus MKLeo, which was awesome. I hope that's something that he continues to do. I love that kind of aura stuff in Smash. But once in that top 8, he has probably the worst matchup that he can get in the entire world, which is going to be Sonix, as I briefly mentioned with Ken on. And I do think that this is the worst matchup for Steve. And clearly, Akola just wasn't feeling comfortable enough in the Aegis yet to bring it out this time around, because it was all Steve versus Sonix, and he does end up losing that one 3-0. I think in the future, the Aegis is not necessarily going to be the solution there, just considering how good Sonix is at the Aegis matchup, but it is going to be something that Akola is forced to try, because Sonix is just such a difficult opponent for him. And 7th place is definitely not the way that Akola wants to start off his season, especially considering he had a literally perfect season prior to this. So it's still top 8 at the biggest event of the world. For any other player, this is very impressive, but for a kola, it definitely is an underperformance. In 5th place, you're going to have Raru and Hurt, starting off with Raru, and I really don't know how this guy does it. Every single time he top 8s a major with Luigi, I'm like, okay, this has to be the last time that he's going to pull it off, because every bracket he gets from now on is just going to be harder and harder, and this was no exception to that. I didn't think he'd be able to top 8 this one, considering that he had to beat Apollo, Kage, Kola, and Shutone to even get into the top 24, and not only does he beat all those players, but he beats them all in game 5 sets, closes it out versus all of them, makes top 8 through the winner's side over Snow as well, and once in the top 8, he does end up running into Shattuck and Sonix, which are definitely tough draws for a Luigi player, really tough draws for anyone, but especially for a Luigi player, but you gotta give Raru his credit here. I mean, the consistency that this guy has with Luigi is unremarkable, easily the best Luigi player that we have ever seen in this game. Borderline top 10 last season, and he definitely could be top 10 this season. Doesn't have an amazing start with that 25th at Coolon, but this is such an incredible bounce back. Huge props to him for the run. And in 5th place beside him, you are going to have Hurt. He's going to pick up wins on MBD, DeBuzz, Zomba, and Twig, so beating basically all of NA's top talent, at least the top talent that he hasn't played before. And once in that top 8, he does lose his run back to Spargo, as well as losing to Osimo in the loser side. Osimo is definitely a player that has been giving Hurt a little bit of trouble, but this is another amazing result from Hurt, especially, again, considering that he doesn't do the best at Coolon, ends up getting 25th there, so this is a really important bounce back for his season. And also that win over Twig has to feel especially good after all of that conversation of, hey, who's the 4th best in the world, who's the 5th best in the world, we're Hurt solidifying it this weekend and saying, hey, it's me at that number 4 spot. In 4th place, you're going to have Osimo. 3rd place, Shattuck. Osimo is going to pick up wins on Yoda Cage, Sense, and MK Leo. That Leo win is especially impressive to me because he's never beaten Leo in the past, and I think both Joker and Aegis do pretty well into Ryu, but Osimo looked very comfortable in that set, winning it 3-0. Almost manages to 3-0 Tweak as well, which would have been a whole other feat in itself, but Tweak does manage to pull off that reverse 3-0, sending Osimo into the loser side for day 3, where he doesn't slow down at all, beating Giest, Zomba, and Snow to get into that top 8. Once in the top 8, he beats both Yoshidora and Hurt before falling to Sonic. So you're losing to 2 players who are top 5 in the world. You can't feel too bad about that one, picking up a bunch of top 20 wins, and you're also going to be the highest placing Japanese player at the event, and that's with players like Akola, Mia, Hurt, Shutone, Yoshidora, Snow, all being in attendance. Not only does Osimo beat half of those players, but outplacing them all is such an impressive feat. Osimo's had an amazing start to the season. 7th place at Coolon, 4th place at Supernova. He's on such a hot streak right now, and I really don't think he's going to be slowing down anytime soon. In 3rd place, you're going to have Shattuck, who is our highest placing American of the event, and also shoutouts to NA for having all of the top 3 being NA. And we're not going to talk about the fact that the rest of top 8 was all Japanese. We're just going to celebrate the little things. Shattuck's going to pick up wins on Lucky, Matador, Peanut, Crepsole, and Yoshidora to get into that top 8. Once in the top 8, he beats Rare before falling to Spargo and Sonix for 3rd place. And I'm not going to lie to y'all, I think Sonix and Spargo were destined for grand finals at this event. They were just playing so well. Again, we'll get to that. But Shattuck, amazing run from him. 3rd place at the biggest event of the year is definitely a solid way to kick off the season. I do think by the end of the year, Shattuck is going to be the best player in America. He's just got so many consistent results under his belt, not only in the first half of the year, but kicking off the second half of the year, you're starting with a podium finish at the most important event. Like, that's literally a perfect start. And our grand finalists are going to be none other than Sonix and Spargo, the coin box grand final. Starting off with Sonix in 2nd. He's going to pick up wins on Vivid and Jaza before getting upset by Snow, like I mentioned. But going into day 3, you have Sonix pulling off probably the greatest streak of players beaten in a row in Smash Ultimate, because he beats Light, Mia, and Tweak to get into top 8. So to get into top 8, he already has 3 top 10 wins. Then he beats the best player in the world, Akola, as well as Raru, Osimo, and Shattuck before falling to Spargo for 5th place. So even though Spargo ended up winning this event, I think that the player that kind of did the best at Supernova is easily going to be Sonix because of the wins that he was able to get. I mean, 5 top 10 wins and 2 top 20 wins is unbelievable. And of course, he keeps that 2nd place streak going. I was getting a little nervous after he ended up getting upset by Snow, had to go through the gauntlet on day 3, but the mental wherewithal from Sonix to not get discouraged, just keep his head down, nose to the grindstone, and go absolutely crazy at this event. Yeah, It's unfortunate that he was not able to get the dub, but it's an inevitability at this point. It's been over a year since Sonix has missed a grand finals at a major event, which is such an impressive achievement. Just massive props to him for that one. And our big winner is going to be none other than Spargo. And this was a tournament of revenge for Spargo. He's going to pick up wins on Pelka, Loaf, Syrup, Ken, and Mars to get into that top 8 through the winner's side. Goes Aegis versus Ken as well. Once in the top 8, he gets his battle of BC run back versus her. And he honestly wins the set extremely dominantly, 3-1 into Spargo's favor. And the games that he was winning, it was 2-stock or even a 3-stock in that final game. It was very clear in the first time that Spargo played her that he was pretty nervous going into that set. There's a lot of double jumps that he was giving away that Hurt was able to capitalize on. His disadvantage wasn't tight enough, but this second set, or this third encounter rather, that was not the case at all. Very tightened up from Spargo. He was playing with a knife's precision, and he managed to get that dub over Hurt this time around, so huge props to him for the adaptations that he was able to make. And it's the exact same thing versus Shattuck as well. You have Shattuck making that crazy comeback on Spargo during Smash Factor 11. Well, Spargo didn't let that happen this time around with a swift 3-0 to get himself into that grand finals. And the only person at this tournament that was able to push Spargo to game 5 is going to be Sonix. And we saw in the grand finals the debut of the Spargo Roy. It was Aegis in game 1, that goes to Sonix, and the rest of the set, it's all Roy. And the Roy actually manages to close it out, which is honestly incredible. And it's not like this was out of nowhere. Obviously, this is something that Spargo was preparing very likely against Sonic. You're not just going to kind of whip out the Roy randomly in the grand finals of the most important event of the year. But Roy is honestly an amazing choice into Sonic. I do think that is an even matchup. You're able to kind of keep up with the speed of the character as well as having a disjoint that can kill Sonic incredibly early. So now we're having Spargo who has access to the Corrin, to the Roy, to the Aegis, and the Cloud. He just has so many choices versus Sonix specifically, and we could also see those characters coming out at literally any point in the bracket, even though Cloud is definitely the one that he's the most comfortable in. Just to be proving that you can play literally 4 characters at the top level of competitive Smash is so impressive. And with that, I thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the sport. It's been absolutely unreal as of late. Spargo, as it stands right now, is poised to be the best player in the world for the second half of the year. And I'm very aware that there's only been 2 events, but this is the best start that he possibly could have asked for. I hope y'all enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.